everyone. How's it going? I have been really looking forward to this conversation that we are about to have tonight. So many of you, so many women across America who have gotten more involved politically in the last 4 years or so, who have become more informed. You're trying to figure out your role now that the election is over. You want to remain engaged, but maybe especially for women who are living in areas where those Trump flags are still flying. But honestly, really, no matter where you live or where you might be on this journey, you want to figure out how to continue to engage. We all want to use our time well, right? So my hope is that this conversation tonight can help bring a renewed sense of clarity and purpose as you're thinking about these things. My guest was one of the organizers of the National Women's March, that happened about 4 years ago and inspired so many women's involvement. She is listed as one of Oprah's 100 super soul influencers, and she also happens to be a member of our national Facebook group, SWEEP, which of course stands for Suburban Women Empowered, Engaged, and Pissed. So we're really excited to have her here because she has basically written the handbook for women who want to step up in this moment, but may not be sure how. The title of the book is amazing. It's Raising Our Hands: How White Women Can Stop Avoiding Hard Conversations, Start Accepting Responsibility, and Find Our Place on the New Front Line. So it's directed at white women because, let's be honest, we got the most work to do on this. But this book and this conversation is for everyone. And we're just especially excited for this conversation tonight because this book is the very first pick in our new book club, which we have created by popular demand. Like, we did a survey and thousands of you filled it out. And one of the number one things you requested, you demanded, you asked for, was a book club. So we are kicking that off tonight. And if you are not in our national Facebook group yet, SWEEP by Red, White, and Blue, get in there, get on it, because we are going to be discussing this book all month. And it's going to culminate with a conversation with the author, who is here with us tonight with me now. And so please join me in welcoming the author, Jenna Arnold.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing as well as can be expected. Yeah. Although today I was, I met a friend outside for a quick conversation, and we both instinctually said, "How are you?" And we both just looked at each other like, I don't know how to answer that question anymore. And maybe it's a silly question. Like, maybe we can just be like, "How's your heart?" Or did you sleep well last night? Or when was the last time you had a salad? Like, I just feel like "How are you?" is not helpful anymore.
Okay, I'm so with you. It's something we just say is this knee-jerk, socially acceptable.
And everyone just said, "Fine, good. Right, how are you?" No, exactly. Nothing's fine. It's nobody's fine.
And everybody answers it with that loaded tone of voice these days too, right? Because it is so much. And I heard like people were suggesting, substitute it with like, just how are you feeling this morning? Just like right now, right this second, or I like how did you sleep too, which is more complicated.
The one that I really lean on a lot is how is your heart doing? Yeah. Because then like I love hearing the words that people like fumble out of their mouths, because I'm always like, oh yeah, me too. Like, even if it's like I'm joyful and I'm absolutely petrified, I'm like, yes, all of those too.
Totally. Okay. So Jenna, you and I both have young kids. I think like similar. Mine are 6 and 2. Is that the exact same?
5 and 3. 5 and 3.
Okay. So very similar.
And I will say, Katie, I was just doing some foreign policy work today, and they were like, "Where's your background in global power? How do you understand how global power works?" And I was like, because I have a 3-year-old. It's the same thing. We just have a lot of academic degrees that make us feel like we're smart, but it's like, timeout, sanctions. Like, I mean, it's just like the same thing.
Oh, they're little dictators half the time, and it's like, right, exactly, power management. So but it's a lot to manage on top of your engagement in foreign policy, writing this really important book, momming for, the couple young kids. So Jenna, let's just start again. How's your heart?
It's unclear. It's unclear, but it is still so overwhelmingly committed and motivated. I'm coming off of, this sounds so weird because it was a month ago, but I have, the month of February has collapsed into an instant because on the evening of the inauguration, we suffered a tragedy within my family, and I haven't been quite able to get my head above water to be like, all right, that's right. Something happened at noon on June 20th. And so like I can fully exhale and get all the oxygen out of my lungs because I'm still just like, where, now what? And, I'm hopeful because it just feels like there's adults driving cars again. But I'm also getting more clear on what the work really is ahead of us. And it's increasingly more undefined because, let's be real, like your success, you and I, before we even knew each other's names, were just so laser focused on November 3rd, right? Like there was like lots of stuff before that and being loud and all, channeling money and asking the hard questions, but we all had a very clear deliverable. We had like very clear homework on November 3rd. And so now that we're on the other side of that, it's like, okay, what are the analogies? Oh, okay, we just plugged the sinking ship, but now we have to like get the engine back on and to decide what land we want to sail to, so it's, how's my heart? It's unclear, and it's highly hopeful and highly motivated and still a bit scared and also totally confused. But I'm okay being there because I recognize that we're in the midst of that kind of growth. And I think one of the things that we do as white ladies particularly well is have to have a plan.
Give me a plan.
And I'm telling you folks, we don't even know where we're writing the to-do list yet. Like we're still so now, where, and what.
Yes. I mean, I think that you have just nailed so many of the feelings so many women are having. What do you do on the day and the days after? And kind of no matter where you are on your journey of that political engagement or coming into these hard conversations. But I do think that your willingness to, recognize the difficulty of that and sort of live in some of that ambiguity is helpful. And I think that we can, so let's do that with this conversation tonight. Let's recognize that it's okay to be there and that together we can seek some at least clarity in purpose, I think.
Yeah, I would say that, one of my big unlearnings for myself is like, come on, like this is my to-do list, people. Like it is color coded. We all know, right? It's embarrassing for me. We all know that like I check all the type A boxes, but one of the things that is so important for us is to move ourselves back into the gray, move ourselves back into the not knowingness. And also like what I love to call the sacred and, where we hold a lot of complex concepts together, which is like everything is exceptionally urgent. And as we were getting on, I was wrapping up a call about Yemen. And that's like, when I say urgent, like we have to solve something in 10 minutes. Like truly 2.3 million children are being starved to death in Yemen as a weapon of war. As a weapon of war, it is an intentional act to harm people as a weapon of war. Like rape was in sub-Saharan Africa in a decade ago, or still really is. And so like that requires like urgent, immediate, like what is she talking about? I can't even process 2.3 million people. I can't even process like 2,000 people. But then there's also the like, okay, what is my job? What's my real currency? When do I speak up? When do I not? How do I know where to go? What organization? Does voting even matter? Yes and no. It's all of those alls. So just welcome to the not knowing.
Okay. Jenna, I want to ask you a very straightforward question about this book, Raising Our Hands.
Please.
Why did you write it? What was the moment where you knew that this book needed to exist in the world?
When I started looking for a book like this to read and I couldn't find it. I'm not at my home in Pennsylvania, so I don't have my copy of the book. I have like an old draft version, at the galley copy of the book. But if you saw my copy of the book, it has like all these little tags and it's super weathered because like I have to keep reading it. I have to keep like unpacking the pretending perfection and this great American myth, right? My husband and I are trying to figure out if we're going to move back to New York City or stay in Pennsylvania. And I have my like thoughts about like, well, what does our home look like there versus what does our home look like here? And like, I see myself playing these great American myth sort of behaviors that I tried to outline so clearly in chapter 2, and this sort of blueprint that we check off. But what I was really struggling with is very literally on the day of the Women's March in Washington, D.C. in 2017, I was standing on stage looking out at a sea of pink pussy hats. And I qualitatively was like, it looks like most of the folks here are white. It was just like bird's eye view from the stage. I matched that with the exit poll from the 2016 presidential that said 51% of American women, white women, voted for Trump. And we can talk about exit polls now or maybe in a future conversation, but they're inaccurate. But it doesn't matter. At that point, I was like, what do you mean 51%? And then I tried to like back that into my relationships with the women who had raised me, took me down to Mexico to build homes for people living in poverty, or they were the ones who like schlepped me to art class and helped me understand disabilities. And then they pulled the lever for Donald Trump. This is in 2016. And I was like, something's not adding up here. What we're doing in the voting booth and how we identify ourselves aren't adding up. And so I was like, okay, great. I'm going to do what so many activists have been asking white folks for so many centuries, from Malcolm X, who will say things like, white men need to go work with white men and work within their own communities. And I have been blessed to be friends with so many activists representing so many different types of communities, voices, perspectives on the front lines for a decade. And we have very intimate and close relationships. And many times over margaritas, they'd be like, yo, you don't know what you don't know. Like, how do you not see this? And the whole time I'm like, what do you mean? I just walked 18 miles with you today in protest of something related to an incarceration, something. Like, how do you mean? What do you mean I'm missing something? And so taking what I saw statistically, hearing what both my close friends and, the heroes of our, of our country say for generations, like white people need to go get white people. And no one's interested in being gotten, but there was a story, or there was a piece of the puzzle that I was missing, because so many white folk would say, I really am good, or he really is well-intended, or I really am a good Christian. And then they would make consumer choices, political choices, opt out of speaking up, silence themselves, prioritize their son's behaviors, like any number of long things that didn't add up with how they were identifying themselves. So I had to unpack how we tell ourselves who we are. Yeah. And it goes back to like our Barbie houses, and it goes back to, the Civil War, and it goes back to what Pope Nicholas V in 1452 said was Christians' responsibility out of Portugal. And so like I had to keep going back to be like, but why did we think this? Why do we think we are? Why, where does that come from? And because I needed to understand that so I could stop the cycle, reverse it, destroy it, perpetuate it, like many different things depending on many different subjects, I needed like the textbook on that, and it didn't exist. So I wrote the book I needed to read.
Okay, so now you can read the book. You can go back. You can dog-ear the book. You can read the shit out of that book.
I love seeing images of people like underlying stuff. I'm like, oh, really? I thought I was going to try to get rid of that sentence. I'm glad it resonated.
I'm glad I didn't. Thanks, editor. Right. Yeah. Okay, so now that you have that book to look at, and we all do, how does it change not only how we think about ourselves, but, well, I would think this is all in the same question, how we think about others in our lives who we're frustrated with, who just seem to still not, opt out of that conversation or that involvement, or who, just come out in a place of total disagreement with us. There is a lot of questions in our communities day to day with just like, how do I engage with people in my family, people in my, my friend from high school, my friend, across the street. How do we even have these conversations, or is it easier just to not?
You better be having those conversations. So the notness is not an option. But before I get to how and why, taking a big step up, I've had this intuition that we've been in the throes of World War III over the past couple of years, probably, before the 2016 presidential. And I just had this vibe that like, we are actually in a wrestle with ourselves. Like we are wrestling with ourselves, not just Americans, not just white women, not just like white female women from the suburbs, like not just a very specific slice of the human demographic, but truly all of us as a species. And I haven't really been able to place where the war was. And I kept saying like, we're not in trenches like we were in World War II and World War I. And like the war isn't being fought with like rifles in the same way they were. And of course there's conflict, violent conflict, warfare happening around the world. I'll bring up Yemen again, where bombs are being dropped. But what I'm realizing, and in my work in foreign policy, I'm realizing that, and the language that's being used now is hybrid warfare, where we're not talking about the trenches like you can think about in like a Tom Hanks film. It's in people hacking our technology, right? And with the potential for them to turn off power grids or water cleaning systems, or most people have had fraudulent charges placed on their debit cards at this point. So it's like that kind of hybrid warfare that's really where foreign policy and diplomacy has to begin, because we have to convince folks around the world that they shouldn't be mean to other folks around the world and turn off the power grid or like hack into somebody's Bank of America debit card. And so when I think about the global species war, it's about how we're being compassionate toward each other, but there's different front lines in that hybrid war. In some cases, it's like online and very tech heavy. And in some cases, it's at our Thanksgiving table and in our conversations with folks in our cul-de-sacs. So again, as a Quaker, I hate to use the analogies related to war, but I'm obviously not that good of a Quaker if I can't come up with any others. So I use the term front line often because it's like, well, where is your front line, right? Like if you're voting, like voting and paying attention to like local and federal election isn't your front line anymore. Your front line is in that complicated conversation with your husband's boss who keeps like commenting about how cute your daughter is that just graduated undergrad, or, the casual chit chat about the weather at the country club when like we need to be talking about like power grids that fail because of climate change rise or
So Jenna, let's get really concrete, because I think that it can feel completely overwhelming and exhausting, to think, okay, so every single conversation I'm supposed to have in my life is going to be about, right? It's not that. And I'm supposed to confront every single person who's using violent language. I'm going to burn out in a heartbeat, and it's not going to be good for my heart or anybody else's.
Yeah.
But once we can understand those boundaries, and there are those people in our networks who we do connect with on a values level, and yet we know they might have voted differently, and there is that disconnect happening. How do we close that chasm a bit? How can we start those conversations?
Yeah. Okay. So it's intimidating and it's complicated, but it is also what chapter 8 and 9 are specifically about. And one of the things, because I was struggling with that too, Katie, I needed a little bit of a cheat sheet. Like, how do I invite someone into a hard conversation? And I very literally give you the script, like text them these 6 words, be like, hey, when you have a chance, I've been thinking about something that you said. Let me know if you ever are open to talking about it, right? Because if you come in with the jugular, right at the jugular, like there's gender pay, like the gender pay gap, when they're like, yeah, but all my bosses are women. Like there's ways to be vulnerable as you enter those conversations that makes it a lot less threatening to the person who, let's be honest, is also struggling and beating themselves up about whether or not they actually know what the hell they're talking about. And like, I've never come across someone who's like, I really 100% know what I'm talking about on every single issue. Like truly, I think there's like 12 climate scientists that I'd be like, you know what? You really have it buttoned up. You know, like everybody is also trying to figure it out. And when we take a position with them and ourselves to invite them to relearn, not unlearn, because if you want to have your very specific perspective on the Arab-Israeli crisis, for example, have it. Can you relearn my position? Can you relearn theirs, even though you might disagree with it? And so in chapter 8 and 9 and a little bit 10 of the book, Raising Our Hands, there's very specific things to enter a conversation, very specific lines for how to exit a conversation when it's gotten a little bit too heated. But I would
Jenna, let's give a few cliff notes just to wet people's mouth, you know, up here in terms of how to get it started. So leading with vulnerability, maybe one of my favorite things to talk about in the whole world. I think it's our superpower and something that women are especially so well equipped to do. And, you know, just to disarm heading into those conversations. And it can be hard because we get that fight or flight place. It's really hard to operate from that empathy and vulnerability. But what does that look like? What does that mean?
Okay. So when I talk about leading with vulnerability, and some people have pushed back and been like, but isn't that caving to somebody else who might have a harmful perspective? And it's not as much saying like, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with something you said, or hey, could you help me understand that perspective a little bit more? It's an invitation in so you can like put your arms completely around them. Because if they're standing like 5 or 6 feet away, there's no way they're going to be willing to listen to you. So vulnerability to me is this idea of asking a lot of questions. Because I have, and this is why I'm like, I only know like 12 climate, I don't even know them personally, but I only believe there's 12 climate scientists or brain surgeons or like epidemiologists around the world, Fauci being one of them, that actually know what they're talking about when it comes to like a virus, right? And we've all seen like, kind of no one really knows what's going on. But this idea of like vulnerability can be like taking the constant curious crouch or like constantly asking questions. So instead of it being like, well, masks do this and and stay at home, and you know, well, they're going to come back at you and be like, it's BS, and what about the economy, and yeah. And instead, if you approach it with, oh, how are you protecting yourself and others if you're not wearing a mask? Oh, you know, how are you still contributing to the economy?
And I love that because that's the shared value. It's not assuming that, oh, well, you don't give a shit about anybody but yourself.
Which, of course, I can make that argument that like, if you're not wearing a mask, you don't give a shit about my health. Like, I think that's true. But it's like, oh, get it. How are you protecting yourself and my grandmother?
If your goal is to actually have a conversation where there could be movement. And
movement. And that's my note for everyone. Like whenever I come up against someone, and listen, let's be real, I spend a lot of time on Fox, and I get a lot of really nice messages in my DMs after I get off Fox, as you can all imagine. And so my note to everybody is constantly like, hey, I just need you to be movable. I don't need you to like suddenly become like a radical progressive activist who's like, you know, eating bark off a tree because you don't want to have another hamburger again. Like, I just need you to move. I just need you to be like, oh, let's talk about the impact of eating meat on the climate or whatever it might be. And this freedom to say, you don't need to change your identity. I think we can just engage in a conversation. And oftentimes the problem, what's happened in our country, though, this is why like our hybrid war is in our relationships and in our cul-de-sacs and at our water cooler, you know, that metaphor. The reason why it's such a difficult place for all of us is because we've been trained that we've been trained to live in the binary, which is either you're right or you're wrong. You're a winner or you're a loser. Because a patriarchal white supremacist society says there's only 2 positions that you could ever be in. 2. You're either dominating or being domineered. Yeah. It's one or the other. It's never equal. It's never collaboration. Capitalism doesn't allow for that. So when we enter these conversations, if we all recognize that like the old way was that one of us had to perfectly enter the conversation, perfectly articulate the point, perfectly respond to their responses, perfectly convert the person, perfectly exit, and then go get coffee.
That conversation does not exist.
It doesn't exist. It has never existed. It doesn't exist with my 3-year-old. It doesn't exist with like my super liberal dad, right? It doesn't exist with me when I'm trying to think about what turtleneck to wear.
Right.
So this idea of like entering these conversations, holding yourself accountable is our front line. So be really vulnerable as you're getting into the uncomfortable space, because that invites them to be vulnerable. But specifically, Katie, to your other question about like, well, do I have to stand up every single time? Like when do I have to say something every single time? Every single time I see someone run a yellow light, do I have to chase them down, right? It's like one of those. And the answer is like, I don't know. And I don't think you should actually set rules for yourself. And I use the analogy that if you've, Katie, have you ever had to call 911 for somebody?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you have to call 911, you don't question whether or not you have to call 911.
No.
You know you have to call 911. And I've been in scenarios where I've had to call 911. And then I've been in scenarios where I'm like, do I have to call? Maybe I can just drive them. Okay. Maybe I don't need to call. Right. So when I think about, what happened in Central Park when a white woman didn't have her leash, her dog on a leash, and then a black male bird watcher called her out on it, then she called the police and dramatized the story. If I were an observer, I would be required to jump in instantly, because I know what can happen when law enforcement and Black men come head to head, right? It is I would have to jump in the deep end and do what I could to protect, take direction from, be an ally, advocate, accomplice, I don't care what the damn word is, with Christian Cooper. But if you're at like the holiday party and your husband's boss has had like a few drinks and made some like misogynistic comment and he's holding court at the bar, maybe you pull him aside later that evening, or maybe you swing by the office the next day and say, hey, Joe, you said something last night that I've really been struggling with. Do you have a minute? I don't know why this is bothering me so much. Maybe you can help me understand. You said so-and-so about how you prefer so-and-so girls to wear tight stuff. And it feels to me like that might be missing the mark when it comes to like intellect, but I must be misunderstanding you, right?
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, it was just a joke, or of course, blah, blah, blah. Like, and like,
yeah. Jenna, having the courage to, have those kinds of conversations and just be thoughtful about how to have them. I know for me, being willing to step into that, it has been some of the most satisfying, ultimately. I'm not saying you're going to win every time, but there's
opportunity. You shouldn't be trying to win either.
And the other thing I just want to give you a chance to share a moment on, and I can't believe we're already getting to time here, and we're going to bring on some other women momentarily, but is what creates that human connection every time. It's not that you come in with the fact or the statistic that is going to change their mind from the point of view or disagree with the statement they made.
That's right. Facts are not, if you get a fact where there's no progress, period.
We worry so often, Jenna, that what if I'm worried to take issue here or enter this lead with vulnerability and put myself in this vulnerable place, and all of a sudden I'm challenged and I don't have that statistic. What if I haven't done enough research and I'm not prepared? And that holds us back from taking those steps forward and instead creating more distance. Why? What is your advice on that to make us feel a little bit more confident heading in?
Is it helpful if I tell you you're never actually going to fully know or understand the full picture? Like, even when you're talking in student parent conferences or teacher parent conferences about your kid, like, you and the teacher have exceptionally, like, a lot of expertise on your kid, but you're still best guessing there.
Yes.
Like, you'll know who he is in 10 years from now. Really, really. And so this idea I found in my research as I was crisscrossing the country, having closed door conversations with American white women, I'm like, why are you opting into silence? And what like blueprint are you measuring yourself against? And, how has America failed you, if it has, or what's your legacy and does that haunt you? It's like questions I'm obsessed with. And I would say that one of the biggest reasons why they don't step into complicated conversations is because they fear that they don't know what they're talking about and they're not going to be able to perfectly enter, perfectly convince, and perfectly exit. And so sometimes, though I try not to ever get issue specific, but that's also an impossibility with us, sometimes guns will come up, and I have lots of conversations with gun owning women, and I say, so do you talk about gun control and gun show loopholes? Or no, I can't. And I say, listen, I'm a little bit dangerous on those subjects, but not really. My front line and the line that I hold when it comes to guns is that I am shrieking about what's happening on the south side of Chicago or in our first grade classrooms. And I actually don't need to move from that line. I don't need to show up and talk about how most of the people who are committing mass shootings are white boys, right? Like white women are responsible for raising the next generation of white boys. Like we have real problems in this country that are in our hands, that are on our shoulders. And it's not just how we vote in, primaries, presidentials, et cetera. It's like how we're raising our boys over our girls. And I have to hold myself accountable with that, like every evening when it comes time to brushing our teeth, right? Like my line with my daughter is like, she's told twice. I give my son times 4 requests. It's just like tiny things like that. And so I would say to you, like, one, here's Jenna telling you don't know what you're talking about. And so can I take the burden of perfection off your shoulders? Yep. And ask you to just step into the conversation with emotion. And one of the things that I always lead with, and it's true, and it goes back to how you asked how my heart was doing, is I am scared too. And there isn't a Republican like Tucker Carlson, like they're scared too. Right? And they doubt themselves too. And so sometimes if I am going to engage in a very political, like intentionally political with my uncle who voted for Trump a second time, right? That second vote from the first vote in 2016 was one thing, and the 2020 vote is another. And I have no language to add to it. After the 2020 vote, after an initial 2016 vote is a different beast, and we all know it. But like, if we were to sit down and be like, all right, let's do this, I would start that conversation with, hey, Uncle Steve, I'm really scared too.
Jenna, those are powerful words, and it completely links back to leading with vulnerability. You got to be vulnerable to say those words. I'm scared too.
I'm scared too.
And I also love, and it connects with this too, this idea of where is your front line and what that does mean. You're talking about a front line of the heart.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, ladies, these are superpowers, like let's use them to unlock this stuff. And I think sometimes we go, oh my gosh, how am I going to have this conversation? It's so hard. How do I talk to this person? Let's go back to these. Let's be willing to lead with vulnerability, find that front line at the heart, and be willing to say things just like you've said, Jenna. I'm scared too. This is really good stuff. Okay, Jenna, I'm going to bring on Julie. Julie, who else do you have with you here tonight?
Well, I have Julia and I have Maya, and we had somebody else, but I don't know what happened. She disappeared. She didn't show. I don't know what's going on, but we have us three.
Hi, Julie, Julia, and Maya.
Hi, Jenna. Nice to meet you. Looking forward to reading the book as part of our book club.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this.
Yeah,
and I will say, Katie, I will say, like, thank you to you and Beverly, who, again, I know we all had a really laser focused agenda for November 3rd, but like the size of everyone's ears are like Dumbo size. They're like, now what? Now where do we go? And thank you so much for leaning into that curiosity and desire. And thank you to everyone just for continuing to show up, because like, actually now's the work.
Now's the work. Thank you so much, Jenna. All right. Maya, it's great to see you. Julia and Julie, I'll let you guys take it from here.
Okay. Thank you both for coming on. I appreciate it. I'm just going to let you guys introduce yourself. I'll just start. I'm Julie. I'm the organizing director for Red, Wine, and Blue. I'll let Julia, you're sitting next to me, so you go. You want to introduce yourself and just say hi.
Hi, I'm Julia. I am in Cleveland, and I related to a lot of Jenna's struggle. My husband and I moved here from Los Angeles not that long ago. So the political climate, the social climate, everything is a little bit to get used to, but we're loving it. I'm a children's book author, and I write a series called Amazing Scientists. It's about hidden figures in the STEM world, and they're women that we should all know, but we probably don't because of reasons like racism, sexism, ableism. We just never heard their stories. And so a passion of mine is just to listen to people and tell their stories. And that's it.
Awesome. And you're really telling us that California is different than Ohio? I'm shocked. All right, Maya, you've been on before, but say hi to everybody. And
hey, everybody, it's Maya. I'm back, and y'all know me.
All right, so what did you guys think? I was just curious what stood out from you from the conversation. I did take a lot of things away, especially just thinking through in my head that I have had these hard conversations and trying to walk that line with people who you care about and correcting or diving deep into issues with them. Maya, I can turn to you on this one. Was there something that was said in that, or talk about a time you've had to have those hard conversations with people in your life? Because I know you are fine with having some of those conversations.
Yeah, I have those conversations on a regular basis, daily, every day. I live in a majority red area that's turning, but it's still very red, and they're holding on to their heritage and other things. And they're my kids' teachers and softball coach. And, you know, I just have to have those conversations. But I thought that it was really good that her book gives people tools, in particular to call out to white women, as it says. I think I was reading what the editor or the publisher said about the book. It was like a call out to white women to do certain things. And I thought it was really good because I was taught and raised to have those conversations. You speak or you're going to get steamrolled over. So you got to speak up for yourself. But I get that, you know, we come from different cultures and we go through life different, so internalize things differently. So I think it's great that she has like, here's a game plan. Here's how you do it. Because I guess a lot of people really, really need that help to help them speak out.
Oh, 100%. I feel like I was actually, when she said she had the actual words in the book, yeah. I'm like, that's so helpful for people who really are, because you have to be uncomfortable to have these conversations. You have to be okay with being uncomfortable, and having a way to start them is super important, I think, for so many people. But Julia, what did you think? Or if you want to talk about having these conversations too? I know you and I talked about that a little bit last time I talked to you.
I mean, just the point that she made that you really, as white women, we're never going to figure it all out. And it's always going to be a little bit scary. I mean, I have felt like I was kind of an activist since probably 8 years old when I started to see how discrimination was affecting people in my own family. And before I even knew it was called discrimination or what activism was. But still, you know, at 44 years old, I am nervous doing this right now. I'm nervous about speaking about this kind of thing because I have so much to learn. And I was telling you, Julie, the other day, I recently joined the board of the Black Lives Matter group in my new hometown, which is Rocky River. We were a red area, went blue for Biden. So I'm very happy about that. But it's an uphill battle. And I was hesitant to take on that role because I need to learn so much more. I am just so ignorant, I feel, on so many things. And there are things I will never understand. But I think it's just addressing that and being willing to learn and support and not lead. And I think I wrote down, she talked about white women feeling like we have to have a plan. And I can relate to that. And the biggest thing I've learned from the strong Black women who are leading my group is, no, we don't need to have a plan. We need to follow a plan. Like, this is not our movement. We need to be there to amplify voices and support and be ready to be checked and be ready to be corrected. And don't get defensive when that happens. It's hard. And I've been checked a lot, and I'm just getting used to that and hoping to kind of be an example for my white friends and people in my own social circles.
But can I just say two things one of the things about what you said? When people check you, it's because they care enough to correct you, and because they see your value, and we know we need you. So it's never like, don't ever take, and I know people do take it personally, or, oh, I'm just not going to say anything. It's like, you are worth saving, girlfriend. You are worth me spending my time telling you this. Take this, you know, and do some.
Appreciate it. Yes. Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is, when we're talking about these uncomfortable conversations, we're already uncomfortable. Why should we stay uncomfortable and let them be comfortable with our life being uncomfortable? Speak out and share your uncomfortableness with those people. And then maybe they'll be, start to get uncomfortable with themselves, and maybe that'll get them to move as well.
Definitely. Thank you.
No, 100%. I agree with you. And that is what my friends always say to me all the time is what you just said, that I deal with this on a daily basis. So you need to step up and deal with this too, and face what we have to face all the time. I'm sorry, you said something else and I was going to address that. Oh, I was going to say, actually, thank you for making the point about if someone is correcting you, that they care enough to do that, because I've sure been in that situation myself where you think you're saying or doing something and then you're told you're not. But that does make me feel like, understand that, like, if they didn't care about me enough, they would have just ignored it and gone on, like I'm not worth the time for that. So that's actually a really great perspective I have, like, for people who are trying to like step up and do the right thing and have a conversation. So I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I find there's like two people that I deal with in these conversations. It's like friends or people who just don't get it at all. And so I find that, like, I can sometimes share a like lived experience with them or someone else's story that they don't understand to make, to kind of raise awareness. But the other issue that I find so much, especially with activism work, is that you have people who think they are totally woke on this, and then they're not. Like, they're the ones who will step in it, right? So I'm sure you guys have experienced that in all the things that you have done. Do you have a way to address that, or how do you handle that kind of a situation? Especially, the people who sometimes I think it's even harder to correct them because they think they know what they're talking about, and they don't necessarily. That's not necessarily true.
I mean, I asked them, "Are you smoking crack?" Because that sounds like a pipe dream. I've literally said that to people who I know. Like, what do you mean to say that? I just started with a little joke or laughter, because sometimes it is incredibly cringeworthy, and you think, well, they should already know this. But it's just like when you're in school, you don't learn something the first time the teacher says it. You have homework, and then you do a review, and then you have a test, and then 6 months later you got to take the test again at the final or whatever. So I just try to remember that my woke friends are still waking up, right? None of us are completely woke, right? So I just try to be patient, and like I said, I laugh with them and at them at the same time.
So how is it different from LA? Because you were dealing with, like you said, a more conservative area, Julia. Are you having more issues with like people like you have to try to explain, or is it the same as where you used to live? I was just curious, because I've been an Ohio native my entire life, so I don't have that perspective.
Right. I mean, the difference is that when you're living in a place like Los Angeles, you tend to be in that liberal bubble and that more progressive bubble with more diversity. And we take a lot of things for granted. So there's something really moving to me about these progressive grassroots movements in these red areas. The people's passion and how hard they work, it's just out of this world, because they're fighting against more, and there are things that they're still fighting for that we take for granted out in some of the blue areas. So, but as far as neighbors, I mean, I've never been in such a very white and segregated area as I am right now. So it's a little eye-opening. I'm noticing people wanting to do something. Again, they're hesitant. There's a lot of propaganda out there. With the BLM movement, a personal goal of mine has been to just kind of be your white lady neighbor, your yoga pants wearing Starbucks neighbor who's got the Black Lives Matter sign in my yard, and people will ask me about it, and I say, yeah, I'm a member. And then they say, really? Aren't they like a communist group or a terrorist group? And then, we get into that. And I'm just here to sort of just be a walking example of, no, come to a meeting. And you want to know what our agenda is? Our agenda is we're putting little diversity free libraries around our city. And we are coming up with proposals for our school to hire more Black teachers. That's our agenda. It's not this stuff that you're seeing in the media. And so that's kind of the way that I'm going about things, because I have done the full spectrum throughout my life. I've yelled at people, I've gotten angry, and I think sometimes we lash out at people because we're so angry at how this is hurting people we love. And what I've come to find is that the backlash doesn't come back on me, it comes back on the people that I am trying to help. And so sometimes you really have to check yourself in your approach and whether what you're doing and how you're going about it is actually going to help the people you want to help.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that's kind of what they were covering too, in terms of approaching with vulnerability and asking questions so that you can get to that point where maybe there is some understanding and it's not just that knee-jerk reaction. Well, Julia yelled at me, so I'm a bad person, you know, so you're reinforcing the negative and the views that they already had. Well, all right. Well, there was just, I'm sorry there were only two of us and we lost our third guest, but I really appreciate you both coming on. And I appreciate your time. It was good to see everybody again.
Thank you.
Everybody has a great night out there, and we will see you later. And I hope you guys are able to participate in the book club. It's going to be so much fun to connect with women in the group and read this book and learn and talk to each other. So we hope to see you there. I hope you'll be part of it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good night, everybody.
Bye. Bye.